I am Jim Collison and live from the Gallup studios here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is Gallup's Called the Coach, recorded on June 29th, 2018. Called the Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you're listening live during this webcast, we do have a chat room that's available for you right below the main video window down there. Just click on the bottom left-hand corner. It says log in. Choose the guest account. You don't have to create one, or you can use any social media account that's available to you. But you can choose the guest account, put your name in, take the numbers out, hit submit, and you can ask your questions live. If you're listening to the recorded version or have questions for us, you can send us an email, real easy, coaching@gallup.com, or there's a contact form right there on the live page. Don't forget to visit the Gallup Strengths Center, just gallupstrengthscenter.com for all your Clifton Strengths coaching resources and training needs. You can also catch the video and downloadable audio for offline listening. We call that podcasting. It's available for you on every platform that's out there. All the links to get that is available on our coaches blog. Go to coaching.gallup.com and click on the resources tab. It's available there for you. Dean Jones is our host today. Dean's the principal architect of Gallup's global client learning strategy. And Dean, always great to have you on Called the Coach. Welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good to have you here. We are returning for part 2 in the series that we started a couple weeks ago, or maybe a couple months ago.
Yeah, right.
It seems like a couple weeks ago. Time flies this time of year as we prep for the summit. But so excited for part 2.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and I'm here in Omaha today. So kind of like instead of being in my home office, I'm here in Omaha today. We did start this this two-parter back in May, believe it or not, and it was about leading strengths trainings. So the intent really of this, when we started this back in May, I had done a couple of Call to Coaches back in 2016 on leading strengths trainings, on leading effective strengths trainings. And they were in September and November of 2016, had gotten a lot of positive feedback about it. There were a bunch of folks who said, hey, that was super useful. And so proving again that we do actually listen to what people say.
We're a survey research company. I'd hope so.
Yeah, exactly. We ask questions and we actually listen. And so, and that a lot of the feedback that I got was, hey, that was great. That really got me started. What's next, right? And so the first part of this was I really started to look at a little bit of a review of what we had covered back in 2016, and then literally a little bit about what had changed, and kind of where we are now, kind of bringing everybody kind of current to that, right? And we know that kind of the focus in a lot of basic strengths education is naming, claiming, and aiming. And I don't know if I said this back at the beginning of May, but I really notice as I talk to coaches that they're discovering that as part of injecting strengths into organizations, that you really have to have basics in strengths education as part of the mix. That a lot of times when people have done Clifton Strengths, and so they've got their report, you want to do coaching calls with them. So you want to do a call that's a feedback call to give them feedback on their profile. You may start an ongoing series of coaching calls with them or coaching conversations with them. But at some point, early on, you really need them to go through some basic strengths education. There's just kind of a download of that kind of material that we really want to make sure that people have, so that they're well equipped to be able to engage in the conversation. I always think about it like kind of inviting them in and bringing them into the world of strengths. It's kind of like, hey, here's what a strength is. Here's what talent is. Here's what these themes are. Here's how this all works. Right. One of the things we are doing, and this has happened since I think the last time we were together, Jim, is we made our big announcement about we're really moving to Clifton Strengths 34. So we're making that much more broadly available. There's lots of enhancements. We have a whole kind of roadmap of enhancements that around that. One of the things that'll be coming in the fall on Gallup Strengths Center is there's an e-learning module that's a basic. It's like a 15 to 20 minute e-learning module that we'll be adding to Clifton Strengths 34 that's designed to provide sort of some of the introduction here. I don't think it replaces anything that coaches would be doing with folks, but just to continue to help to make sure that we've got that kind of basic strengths education. So people get started, they can kind of navigate in the world of strengths and get started thinking about naming, claiming, and aiming their strengths, right?
Dean, that's a little, actually, I get a lot of feedback from the coaches in the Facebook community about that. What do you do? What's the pre-learning before you do your first coaching session? We've heard that a lot. I
Yeah.
love that we kind of responded to that with this e-learning module, right? So
Yeah.
a 20-minute session, you can subscribe, they can go in, go to the GSC, pick it up, watch it before they come, and we'll give them some great content before your first session.
Yeah, and I will tell you, it's funny as we've started to launch this, even with our own folks here at Gallup, people are like, well, does that then replace a half-day course I would do? Or does that replace a full-day course? It's like, no, in 15 minutes, we're, you know what I mean? Sorry that I think that's funny, but like, like 15 minutes of introduction does not replace a day of learning, right?
Right.
So I think it's one of those things where but it does provide, I always think about it like a great on-ramp. Right? It gets people in the world of it, gets people thinking about it. And we touch on some of the most important themes in 15 or 20 minutes that people can do. It is interactive. I hope everybody, as they start to, again, the people won't see it on Gallup Strength Center until the fall. But I think as people start to get exposed to that and see that, I think that'll be interesting and super useful for people. So I'm excited for people to see it. And it starts to get people in the world of thinking about naming, claiming, and aiming their talents so they can develop those talents into strengths. The reason that we say, let me just go back to the point on this because I want to make sure that point really lands for people, is the reason that we see that you need some basic strengths education is if you don't have that, oftentimes your first couple of coaching calls, all you're doing is like leading a one-on-one course. You know what I mean? You're not really coaching anything. You're not really helping them understand their profile. You're just sort of leading a one-on-one strengths course the first couple of sessions, right? So so you don't get the kind of coaching and discovery and kind of like interaction. It's not as rich when people don't have that, right? So typically we tell people, when people ask our recommendation about this, we tell people first do the assessment, then have some kind of basic strengths education, then have a feedback call, then kind of move into coaching sessions, right? So that kind of progression often happens, right? We also tell people, and I will tell you, I get this question a lot as people think about working with managers and working with teams, particularly. People, when we go out in the world as coaches and strengths educators, people are very, very, very interested in anything that has the word team in it, right? Team session, team strength session. It's like, oh, give me that, right? Because everybody wants teams to function better. They want better collaboration on the team. They want better understanding. They want to be able to navigate conflict better on teams, all those things and strengths really helps people to be able to do that. The challenge that often you run into, though, is people oftentimes are not ready to talk in a team about their strengths till they understand their own profile and they can articulate, here are my strengths, here's what I do well, here's what I contribute, here's the contribution that I offer here, right? So I always try to tell, when we work with clients, I always try to tell clients, hey, the first part about having your teams impacted by strengths is having each person know their own strengths profile, understand their own talents, understand their contribution. That starts just being able to say, hey, here's what I bring to the party is the most valuable piece, right? So you want people to have that individual piece, right? So in the last session, we kind of did a recap, and if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to that. Hopefully that'll be useful for people to kind of bring you current around that. The thing that I talked about in the stuff back in 2016, I think it's basically stood the test of time, where I said basically there are 5 things that I would make sure in basic strengths education that I covered. That you talked about how strengths is rooted in a study of excellence. Right? So strengths are really a pathway to excellence. And the more we talk about weaknesses, I think the more important that becomes. The CliftonStrengths is an instrument that's designed to assess talent and concentrations of talent. CliftonStrengths is not a weakness finding tool, right? So it's that sounds like an obvious point, but it's not. So as we talk more about weaknesses, it's not really designed to find your weaknesses. It's really designed to find your strengths. And we've talked about this before in some of the podcasts we've done, but strengths and weaknesses are not opposites, right? So you don't, by fixing a weakness or by correcting for a weakness, you don't get a strength, right? So CliftonStrengths is really rooted in the study of excellence. It's designed to help people to build really peak performance, right? Um, I think in basic strengths education, you really want to make sure you're defining what talent is, what strengths are, what talent themes are, so people can kind of navigate in that world. You really want to introduce Clifton Strengths, and particularly those 34 themes. People ask a lot, do I need to introduce the four domains right off the bat? I would tell you that, people have different opinions about that. The four domains are really easy for people to understand. And I think that oftentimes people really get attracted to the domains because 4 is easier than 34. But the challenge with the domains are people start to get immediately worried about where do my strengths fall in those domains. So the coaching that I often give people is save the domains. You know what I mean? Start with the 34 themes and then later introduce the domains on top of them, because people get really worried about that stuff.
Yeah,
right?
Dean, we see the panic in Facebook all the time where folks are jumping in and saying, all 5 are in relationship building. I don't have any, strategic thinking.
I can't think.
What is, I can't. And it couldn't be farther from the truth. Right?
Yeah.
And so
right.
that is a danger of going right to domains. We see that all the time.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm going to talk about that a little later as we talk about kind of advanced development here around this. But the thing that with the domains, I think it's a great overlay. I think it helps us to be able to think about that. But you also risk oversimplifying, right? And so one of the things we know, and some of the brilliant work that was originally done by Kurt, is we know some of those domains really straddle or some of the themes really straddle domains. So for instance, woo is, in our strengths-based leadership work, we classify that as an influencing theme, and certainly it is, but it's also a relationship theme too, right? And so there's lots of those things. When we look at it, we could say, hey, it's not perfectly clean, right? So strengths is rooted in the study of excellence, defining strengths, talent and themes, introducing Clifton strengths to people, and particularly those 34 themes, introducing naming, claiming, and aiming, right? And that is our very simplified way of helping people to be able to understand what their themes are, develop their awareness and appreciation around their themes, and start to point their themes at outcomes, right? And then finally, weaknesses, that people understand, hey, just because we're talking about strengths doesn't mean you just ignore your weaknesses. Excuse me. You need to be aware of those. You need to be able to account for those. So that's part of the mix here, right? So those 5 things I think are key. If you're interested in those things, I'd go back and listen to those podcasts. Again, I think they've kind of stood the test of time, right?
And Dean, let me tell folks, you have your own channel or own playlist on our YouTube channel. So if folks want to go back to those, really the easiest way to do that, go to the Gallup Strength Center on YouTube and just find Dean's playlist. Everything we've done over the last 2 years is kind of outlined there, outlined really well. We did, as of this recording, we're going through some process of changing the titles, and those got changed a little bit. So you may have to dig some or change them back here shortly, but you have your own playlist. So I'll let folks know they can go out and find those. That's an easy way of getting Dean Jones all the time. If you binge on Dean Jones, though, it has some medical side effects.
It does. A little nausea, a little hallucination, a little vertigo.
Right. Yeah, just get up and walk around every once in a while. That's what's
Please don't do this while driving. Use care. Don't operate heavy machinery.
That's right.
That's great. So as we think about advanced strengths education, right? One of the things that I said, I kind of gave you at the end of last part of this one, a little bit of a teaser here, because I always like to be able to simplify it a little bit, to be able to say, hey, here's some ways to think about this. So you've got that basic strengths education, which fundamentally really is about introducing strengths and introducing naming, claiming, and aiming, right? The next level, the next more advanced strengths development, I think occurs along 4 dimensions, right? And those 4 dimensions are breadth, depth, calibration, and awareness. Again, let me say it: breadth, depth, calibration, and awareness. Let me talk through what I mean by those. And then I want to kind of talk about some of the kinds of work and the kinds of activities that you want to include around that. Okay. And gosh, I think this is the kind of thing we could go all day on. And so I just want to give you kind of a taste of it, because I know there's a lot of brilliant coaches out there that are doing great work translating this into learning programs, into coaching programs, into other work. So I trust everybody's ability to be able to do that kind of translation. I just want to give you kind of the thinking frame for how to think about this a little bit, right? So the first is breadth, right? I think it's important for people to really understand. So after they've been introduced, it's important for people to really understand all the CliftonStrengths themes, be able to identify them, and particularly be able to say what they contribute. So I think that's a really important piece for people. And as I was thinking about it, I was thinking about this last night, and particularly for those of you who work with managers and leaders inside organizations, this is super important, right? That they have a sense of the breadth of the talent themes. I will tell you that people tend to start first with sort of understanding their own talent themes and understanding some of the ones that they're drawn to, right? Sometimes you see people that get drawn to also some of the ones that don't occur as frequently, or are sort of the opposite of me, right? It's kind of like, oh man, I really want to understand that. That's totally not me. Right. And so, but the capability around breadth that we want to develop is something that we always talk about as kind of strength spotting, that people can look at somebody's behavior, the way people operate, the way they act, the way they think, what motivates them, the way they behave, and start to see the talent themes, the composition of talent themes that is driving that. Right. And so, and particularly for folks that are in manager and leader positions, the ability to really spot somebody's talent and harness that talent is so critical. One of the things I like to do, and we don't do this in our basic strengths education, but I do think it's important that we add this in a little bit more of our advanced work, is to go back to what is often called the 5 clues to talent. Don Clifton called them the characteristics of strengths, right? It's really the 5 things that he used to be able to identify, is that really a talent? Right? Is that really something that we would describe as a naturally recurring pattern of thought, feeling, or behavior that can be productively applied? And he said basically there are 5 things, right? Yearnings. Are you drawn to do that? And you can really see this in people's behavior. They tend to be drawn to certain kinds of activities. When you look at somebody's resume, you can see whether they were successful or not. You can see those patterns in the kinds of things that they're drawn to. In somebody's behavior in an organization, what are the activities they kind of gravitate? Those yearnings, I think, are super important as a way of understanding talent. That sense of deep satisfaction. When I do this, I find myself, I love, Paul Allen was the one who talked about strength coaching being a calling, right? I think he was pointing to that thing that Don talked about as deep satisfaction, right? That kind of, when I do this, I had that sense, it's like, man, this is what I'm made for, right? Glimpses of excellence is the third one that in the clues to talent. What are those moments where you could just see not just something that's good, but there's something that's world class? And I always like one of those, I love that story or that video about Susan Boyle, and here she is, this kind of frumpy kind of person from the UK, gets on this national talent show. Her opens and starts to, her voice opens and she starts to sing, and like, oh my God, it's just like the heavens opened up, right? I mean, just incredibly, you could tell, man, there's somebody who had a world-class voice. And there's all those things. You can see it in kids sometimes. You see it with adults sometimes when they discover that area where they've just got natural talent. The fourth is rapid learning. And you really see this, I think, it's one that I think managers find particularly useful, is to be able to say, gosh, if I put somebody in this job, or if I give somebody this task, do they intuitively know the steps to the task? Do they intuitively sort of sense, how do you get this done? You see this a lot with salespeople, by the way. It's like, people that have natural talent around sales, you put them in the job, you don't have to say, hey, first create a relationship, right? Or smile and shake their hand. You know what I mean? That doesn't have to be in an instruction book. They just know, hey, I've got to create rapport. Right? As part of being in sales, I need to be able to think about what's in the customer's self-interest, right? So those sort of natural, what you see with rapid learning is that intuitive sense of what are the steps there, right? And they sort of know kind of, hey, they sort of have a feel for that kind of thing, right? And the fifth is flow, that sense of timelessness, that sort of sense of, hey, it's like I do this and I lose track of time. I lose track of, it's just like I'm fully in the moment, right? So yearning, satisfaction, glimpses of excellence, rapid learning, and flow. When you're building breadth, you want to be able to help people to spot, wow, that's a talent, right? And you want people to be able to say what that talent is linked up to that talent theme, right? So they understand the 34 themes and they can say, oh, I see that you're that way. Oh, that's deliberative. I see that. That's your achiever, right? And the more we can listen for that, and as coaches, as managers, the more we listen for that, the more we can get up under people and point them in the right direction, so they're leveraging their talents in really meaningful ways. Does it make sense?
It does, Dean. And in one of those things, back to the conversation, I hear a lot of people say they'll be expressing one of those themselves, and they'll take it back to that. Oh, that's my theme of communication. That's my arranger doing that. I oftentimes, when we are having that weakness conversation around those, because sometimes that happens a lot on the weakness side. In other words, somebody finds a weakness. I talk too much. Oh, that's my communication. I often want to turn that and say, well, then how are you using that communication for success?
Yeah.
Instead of keeping it in the weakness area, how am I turning that into success? I think I'm going to use that a lot more in our Facebook groups to say, hey, let's turn that into success. Let's get that pattern moving in a positive way instead of constantly, because I think sometimes we use that as a crutch. Right. Like, oh, I just talk too much.
Yeah.
And instead of saying, well, how do I turn that talking into value? How do I make that a successful, enterprise for me?
Yeah, and let me be a little more pointed on that. Like I'm notorious for this, but let me put a finer point on that. Is when we do that, we turn themes into labels. When we do that, what we do is the themes become labels. It's you need to manage your communication, or you need to manage your activator, or you're too deliberative, and all of a sudden we've labeled somebody. So we've destroyed the value of that theme. I'm exaggerating to make a point, right? But we just destroy the value of that theme when we turn it into a label like that, right? Because the intent here is to identify talent, get up under talent, and the expression of talent, right? We want it to be a positive thing rather than something that we go, gosh, you know what? This is a label. You're now labeled this way, and it's something that you gotta manage, right? And again, the point of the talent is that we're pointing people toward the expression of talent that yields great performance, great outcomes, great deep satisfaction, right? That points toward excellence. So to your point about the Facebook group and other places, it's like, okay, great, you got great communication, right? What are you creating with that? How are you going to use this for positive intent? How can you use this really productively, right? Because we want that communication contribution, right? And we want it to forward the action here for us, right? Some of the activities around breadth, right? And I would say, like we have a whole learning design group of 12 full-time people that do nothing all day but think about translating our research and our thinking and our science into activities, right? But a lot of the kinds of activities we want to do, like one of the basic activities we do in a lot of strengths education is highlight the phrases in the report or the words on the fort that resonate with you, where you see yourself, and share those, right? That highlighting and sharing activity is great for the person to be able to say, yes, this is me. And it creates a lot of ownership. But in the process of sharing it, other people start to get a sense of those themes, right? So having people be able to share, it's funny, I was thinking last night, many, many years ago, I've been at Gallup for almost 13 years. It was probably like, I had to be 11 years ago, right? I was starting a new role, and we had a team together, and the guy who was leading our team had us go around and pick one theme and just highlight kind of the words that really resonated for us, and then share why that resonated. And that session was so memorable for me because it was not just that I was able to express myself as who I was for this group and the contribution that I was, but I was able to listen to everybody else and really get what they were going to contribute and who they were, right? It was a way of expressing themselves that had great positivity, great positive intent, and where the contribution, the collaboration could start to form, right? I also think another tool that we make available are the Clifton Strengths Discovery cards. Those are those simple cards. They're not the Theme Insight cards, right? Those are designed for coaches, but the Clifton Strengths Discovery cards, we sell them in the Gallup store. Another thing I think is useful for building breadth, right, is helping people to understand that there's many paths to success. I love to have, I think one of the great things that you can do as a strengths educator or strengths coach is to facilitate conversations. And at the end of the day, it's really a simple conversation. It's to be able to say, hey, to be able to help people share, how did I get there? How did I get to that success? I think about conversations that I've facilitated with salespeople, right? And I've done a lot of work in my career, and particularly at Gallup, with salespeople, right? Where they'll say, you'll have a room of salespeople and they'll be talking about a shared expectation they have or shared result. Hey, I got to go close that deal, right? But each one of them talking about, here's how I used my strengths to advance the ball there. And it's different for each one of them, but the expectation is the same. So helping people to facilitate conversations where we say, hey, we are all in this job. We have a shared expectation, and we're not lowering our standards. We don't make the standards different because you have different strengths. But each one of us, because based on our unique configuration of strengths, are going to approach that and accomplish that in different ways. And having people share that then helps people to understand, one is there are different ways to accomplish that. And two is you can start to listen for how do people they deploy their talents in a way that's unique and powerful. So you start to be able to hear all the different ways that people do that. That's a great team activity, I think, for people to be able to do, right? So if you're a manager with a team and you do that kind of activity and helping people to understand, hey, here's how I think about it. Here's how I apply this to be successful, right? Another thing I think is just simple and really powerful is the team grid work that you do, right? So team grid work to help people understand, hey, here's our shared strengths. Here's the things on the team that are our shared strengths. And then to be able to explore the outliers. I have this one, nobody else on the team has this. Or, Jim and I have this one. Here's how we contribute that on the team. To be able to look at it. So you start to get kind of the breadth of what's happening here. None of us on the team have this. How does that impact our team, right? So you start to be able to explore all 34 of those teams, right? Another one that I really like is, and it's a simple exercise, is just having somebody, being partnered up with somebody, having them talk through their themes, and then I introduce them to the group by having to share what their themes are, right? It forces me to really listen, particularly if those themes are not ones I share, right? It forces me to listen, even if they are ones I share, because the way they manifest in you is not necessarily the way they're going to manifest in me, right? And so if I explain your achiever the way it is for me, then I'm not getting you, right? And so having people really listen to what are those themes and be able to explain those themes. So some of the kind of activities that might translate to build breadth, right? I probably need to speed up here a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, it's okay. Or we'll do a part 3.
Okay, great.
One of the things I'll add, that best of me exercise is a great one to pair with introduction, because it gives that person to say, you get the best of me when, and then that partner can listen and repeat that back. And so just the pairing those two together works really, really well.
One of the things with the best of me exercise too that I think is great when people do that is when you can ask people, you get the best of me when, and they can share their talents, but then you ask them also to give an example, right, of when they produced a result or when they had a success with it, right? Our whole study of strengths is rooted in a study of success. It's rooted in a study around performance, right? So when you can land that for people in a specific example, it's not just, it becomes, sometimes when you do the best of us exercise or the best of me exercise, right? It's just like, it's kind of like, oh, I'm a diva. I've got to have these conditions to work, right? You know what I mean? As opposed to, hey, here's how I use my talents to be successful. Here's how I say I can use them to contribute to our success, right? You get the best of me. You get the best of this talent. And here's what I contribute with this talent. And here's how I've landed in the past, right? Here's how I've used my achievement. or here's how I've used my communication skill, to be able to do that in the past, or my command, whatever it is, right? So the first is breadth, right? The second is depth, right? And I've talked a lot. I feel like sometimes I'm like, I beat this drum almost too much, right? But I've talked a lot about in the past about the importance of really unpacking all the traits in a theme. I think that, and I see this just still too often, is where when people are learning the themes, what they end up doing is they know one or two traits. They know one of two of those natural patterns of thought, feeling, or behavior that are in the theme, and they kind of collapse the theme on all those things. So part of what you want people to be able to do is you want people to be able to start to unpack all those traits in the theme. I think on one of these podcasts in the past, I talked, Jim, about the theme of significance. Right. And I think, one of the exercises that I love to do personally, I think has helped me a tremendous amount, is going through each theme description and writing out all the patterns of thought, feeling, or behavior that I could unpack. Right. And I remember at one point I had gone through significance, I'd written out something like 15 or 16 different patterns of behavior. The reason I did it is because I was managing a woman who's had significance number one. Right. And there were things that I could see, man, that fit with my conception or my understanding of significance. There were a lot of things that she was doing that didn't fit with what I knew significance to be, but when I went to the description and started to unpack all those patterns of behavior, all those traits that live inside that theme, I could start to see, oh no, that's exactly what's going on here. Her need for autonomy and for independence in the way that she works, right? Her need to have connections with important people, right? All those things I could see, that was all part of that significance theme that was sort of at play there. So what we want to do when we're building depth is really helping people to think more deeply with regard to the themes. And again, I feel like a broken record here today, but I think it's particularly important for coaches. And I know we got a lot of coaches who listen to the podcast, but it's also really important for leaders and managers in organizations that they really understand kind of the dimensionality of those themes. They really understand that how that theme work. And as you think about those themes, it's not just, hey, what is this theme? But how does that then impact the way a person thinks, a person feels, a person acts? How does that do that? Really understanding and knowing, what does that theme contribute? What does that theme need? How does that theme often express itself? What's motivating for someone with that theme? What happens when this theme is under duress, right? So to be able to say, oh yeah, I get the whole world of that one. I get how that works, right?
Dean, that really stretching that talent, I think, is important to discovering its true nature. Sometimes, right, we get in these themes under the best possible conditions.
Yeah.
Right. And that stress is important. And then to go back to a statement you said earlier, I hear this a lot too in the community, is when we reduce those, we have that PowerPoint, stand up if.
Oh, yeah.
And you say some things. And I think there is a tendency to let those labels, in other words, every single person with achiever is a list maker, right?
Right.
And we know that's a characteristic, but sometimes we make it too simple and we need to dig deeper. I am super guilty of this.
Yeah.
Of just letting it become one single trait or one single idea. And I love the emphasis on maybe sitting down as a coach and really forcing yourself into what are the other talents that I'm seeing in this, or how can it manifest? Maybe put a name to it so it makes it personal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think to your point, Jim, I think it's one of those things where, remember, first of all, we have to develop that capability ourselves as coaches and educators, right? But then we've also got to, our job is to develop that capability in other people, right? The value, I'm going to get real deep real fast here, okay?
But I like it.
Go.
What
happens with people, the more people have a command of language, the more nuance they have in their thinking, right? So we know that thinking arises in language, right? So the more breadth and depth somebody has in their language, the more nuanced they are in their thinking, right? It's kind of like, it's like looking at being able to say everything with four legs is a dog versus that there's different breeds of dogs and there's a difference between a dog and a cat and a horse and a cow, right? The more nuance you've got, the more power you've got, the more your ability to be able to think in nuanced ways are, right? And so part of what what strengths gives us is a more nuanced language for thinking about talent. But even inside of each one of those themes, there's a whole breadth, there's a whole world inside each one of those themes, right? So so we need to build that in ourselves, but particularly we want to build that in the people we're coaching, that in the leaders and managers that we're working with, the people that work with people, right? The more nuance we can build in the way that they understand talent and the way they're able to see talent and see the expression of talent, the more powerful they'll be in that role and the more effective they'll be in that role, right? They'll create workplaces that are the kind of workplaces that are engaging and powerful and productive for people, right? So ways to build depth, right? I really think it's important for people to read theme descriptions. I think those general theme descriptions are just, I know it seems like kind of pedestrian, but man, I tell you, that's great stuff, right? And particularly, I know people often kind of jump to our Strengths Insight reports, which are highly customized. Having those sort of general theme descriptions are really, really powerful, right? I think creating some sharing where you have people really unpack everything that one theme contributes, right? So, I'm activator number one, right? So a lot of people, it's like activator, and I know that there's a whole like activator support group out there that's champions like, hey, why is the word impatient in the description? That it's negative and should be eradicated, right? Like pitchforks, torches, right? You know what I mean? Yeah. Right. So, yes. And I'm with them, by the way, 100%, right? Yeah. Let's just just so we know what party I'm, where my party lines are, right?
Good self-awareness there.
Yeah, exactly, right? But I think one of the things it's great, like with activator, just to be able to say, yes, I bring a sense of urgency. Yes, I bring energy, right? Yes, I bring it, but also I bring that ability to translate ideas into actions, right? And that's one of the things I contribute around that, right? Is to be able to say, hey, I know how to take a discussion and translate it into what are the actions we need to take and what are those actions going to start to look like, right? So all those things and I think it's great to set up sharing where people, instead of being able to say, my achiever does this and my communication does this, my deliberative does this, to be able to just stick with one theme and say, hey, it does this and it does this and it does this and it does this, right? So that we help people to be able to share those things. And both in the sharing, we're building self-awareness, but in the listening, we're also helping people to build depth around all the aspects of that theme, right?
Dean, you encouraged coaches to go out and really study those 34 themes, that not the insight reports, but the themes themselves. And so Gail is asking, where's the best place to go? Do we have a combined list of those? Certainly
of the traits?
Not of the traits, but of the full theme descriptions.
They're in our books. They're in all of our books, right? So there's the general theme descriptions. They're in our books.
I'm sorry, I was throwing a little softball.
That was very right. Exactly. Sorry. It's Friday.
I'm kind of liking it too.
Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah.
So one of the things right now, Center, you've done strengths, you get our Strengths Finder 2.0 book, or the ebook. If you don't have that, the other thing people can buy that I think is super useful is we have both a physical copy and a digital copy. I know our friends that are outside the US are like, shipping costs are killing me. But then we've got a digital thing, is the CliftonStrengths resource guide. So if you go to the store, there's something called the CliftonStrengths resource guide. It has the general descriptions, it has the short descriptions, it has action items. It's just a great resource. This is just a shameless plug, right? But one of the things we launched without a lot of fanfare was an enhanced version of the CliftonStrengths resource guide that's digital. Right. We put it on the Gallup store. And so people can go to the Gallup store and buy this enhanced version of the CliftonStrengths resource guide that's digital. It's a super great resource. Right. And I would say, gosh, that's if you're coaching, it's just a great resource to be able to have. So I would include, I think it's relatively inexpensive too. I don't think it's wildly expensive either. So I would really look at that as a way to be able to do that. I think that's super useful. Right. Another thing that's great to when you're having people share about their themes, right, is I always like to say, there's and if you think about the Johari window, right, there's the, everybody knows I'm a fan of that because I think it's a great basic construct for thinking about self-awareness, right? But there's elements, there's the stuff that we see, but there's the stuff that people often miss, right? So I think it's great to be able to, for people to be able to talk about their themes And to be able to say what people see is this, what they often miss is this, right? I'm focus number 2, right? What people often see is my intensity and my goal orientation. What they miss is my determination around it, right? And the energy and the focus and the ability to eliminate all the distraction around it, right? My ability to kind of prioritize around it. So I think it's great for people as you're facilitating learning, for people to say, hey, this is what people often see about my theme. Those are the things they point to in me, right? This is the thing I want you to know that you miss, right? It's a way of kind of getting at what are those parts that I may be reluctant to contribute. It may not be politically correct for me to contribute that. I contributed it once. It didn't really work out for me. You know what I mean? And so you start to get the range of somebody's contribution around that, right? And so, I have command number 10, right? What people often see is my ability to wade in when there's chaos. What people often see is that sometimes I'm black and white about things. What sometimes they miss about that is my willingness to take charge when everybody seems to be confused, right? And so I think it's great for people to be able to talk about that stuff. Right?
Yeah, no, it's helpful in our command. I also have it. It's lowered. It's down 15. I use it when there's chaos.
Yeah,
I will always step in, but I'm always willing. When there's a leader, I don't have to be the leader. In fact, I'm better in that, right? And that's really, as I think about groups that I'm in, it's super helpful for the group to know.
Yeah.
So in chaos, I will jump in and say, "Hey guys, we got to fix this."
Yeah.
But I always tell folks I'm working with. I've told you, I've told others, I am a much better number 2 guy behind the scenes or assisting. The art of the assist. Yeah. I think those things are really, really helpful to have in the depth of a team relationship, to understand the nuances of those as much as it is the straight definitions that sit there, because we miss the elements of the real power of our themes when they fill in those gaps, right?
Yeah, and that's depth, right? You want people to have depth. So you want to start to be thinking about, there's often places, let me just say this one more thing about depth, okay? Is I think oftentimes with, there's places where people are misunderstood in the expression of their themes, right? And so there's things you're known for that are a function of your themes, but there's things that are misunderstood that are misappropriations of your themes, if you will, right? And often having people say, "What am I known for? What am I misunderstood? Right? Where am I misunderstood? Right?" And being able to share that and have opportunities to be able to share that, I think helps people to refine kind of the expression of their themes. So you're building self-awareness. All this stuff, by the way, is building self-awareness, but you're building self-awareness for the person, but you're also helping those around that person to really understand the real depth and the complexity and the nuance associated with those themes. I want to take a little side trip here for just a second, okay? And then I know you want to take some questions out of chat, right? So one thing that cannot be overestimated, I think in beginning education, it's really about me understanding me. I think in a lot of it, it's me identifying my talents, me understanding me. I think pretty quickly you got to move to me understanding everybody else, right? So there's got to be a lot of, and where that comes from is a lot of sharing. There's got to be me talking about my themes, expressing my themes, listening to others then express their themes. So pretty quickly in strengths education, you want to move to how are you going to share your themes with your environment, right? How are you, the teams you work on, with your manager, with colleagues and with clients, how are you going to share that in a way that's really meaningful? And because it has people know you, right? And has people start to relate to you inside of that, it also helps you to be able to relate to them. People say, oh yeah, I don't have that. Right? The way I tend to think is this way. right? Or the way I tend to like to tackle projects is this way. It sparks a conversation so we can talk about each other. And part of the real value of it is we can talk about individual differences in a way that's not judgmental, that's positive, and really allows us to understand each other better. So the sharing piece, the thing I'm underscoring here is the sharing piece. As you know, sometimes I talk to people in organizations who started with strengths, and they're sort of parked in me understanding me. Right? It's all about me understanding my own themes, me understanding my top 5, me understanding my top 10, me understanding my bottom 5, all that kind of stuff, right? And it's all about me understanding me, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to move pretty fast into sharing, and that way, because that starts to create the foundation for us working together to translate talent into performance. Okay.
That's a great example. We had a education institution here in the Omaha area on campus just recently, and good friends with a bunch of them on a team.
Yeah.
And what was super fun, they've been doing this for a while, was super fun is when they start talking about each other instead of just themselves, right? When they start finding, oh, no, I could never have done that. I had to rely on, or we used so-and-so's. I think that's a really good mark if you want to measure some maturity in the organization. I think a really good mark is, are you talking about others?
Yeah.
And is that always coming back to yourself? And how well can you describe your partner's contributions and themes and how they're being utilized, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a good mark of maturity. We get that question a lot. How do we know it's working?
Yeah.
Well, what are the conversations, right?
Here's a really simple test, by the way, is if I ask you, think of somebody who's one of the people that you work with, an important partner that you work with, right? Now tell me what their top 5 themes are. Right. And it's a funny thing, even at Gallup, right? Some people are pretty good, at being able to say, gosh, achiever, significance, harmony, right? Like you can kind of pick them out, sometimes it's like, gosh, I missed that one. Right. So being able to say, it's an exercise in strength spotting. It's an exercise in building depth. It's an exercise in being able to translate behavior into themes, right? All those things, just to be able to say, like, think of somebody. I think it's great for all of us to do, and a great practice to be able to say, hey, what are those strengths? Right. So go ahead, Jim. I think you had some questions.
Well, Dean, I had one more question for you. And,
okay,
I think I'm going to encourage us to take, collaboration and awareness and actually move that into the next one. So as you mentioned that earlier, there's so much great conversation going on here, but you mentioned insight report versus just the theme, just the theme descriptions.
Yeah.
And I think some folks, as we talk about depth, both documents have great potential. And I get the question, do I use insights first? Do I use the theme descriptions? What can you give a little insight or at least a little advice on as coaches approach that?
Yeah.
Everybody does this differently, right? I mean, certain people with analytical might want to go one way or the other, but talk a little bit about that, Dean.
Yeah, I think it's so the way we used to do it, okay, is that we used to always start with the general descriptions. So the way our philosophy for a long time was, you start with the general description. Somebody understands the general description or the generic description of achiever, right? Then they read their insight report so they can see how their achiever is colored by their other themes. Right. So they know achiever in the sort of the generic achiever. Then they understand, okay, how this achiever has been colored by those other themes that they possess. Right. I think they have different uses. So I think it's both are important. Right. I think having the general description of your signature themes, your top 5, having the general description of all 34 themes, I think is valuable for people because it tells people, here's the world of that talent theme. Here's everything that's sort of included there. Oftentimes with the Strengths Insight Report, when people read that Strengths Insight Report, they have the experience, holy cow, you've been reading my mail. Right? You know what I mean? Like, you just know me inside and out. Right. And so it's like, you just know, and that's great for validating the effectiveness of strengths, validating, holy cow, this stuff works. Right. holy cow, this is really the expression of me. And it sort of captures theme dynamics and the theme interaction in a really powerful and important way. So if you're trying to create the credibility around strengths, if you're trying to create that personal experience, the theme insight report is really great. If you want to help people understand what is the world of that theme and then where do I play relative to that, reading the general descriptions are good. So you can start at either end. I think the thing that's important is to make sure that you do have both, though. So the thing that I would say I would really encourage you is it's not one or the other. You really want both, right? So you start at one end, you go to the other. You start at the other end, you go to the first, right? So you know, and either one you want to be able to help people with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's not just I don't think you apply a formula to it.
Right.
I think it takes some thinking and some thoughtfulness and what's the situation you're going into, and is it in a group setting or is it an individual setting? What kind of pre-work is be done? What's the history of the person you're coaching in the past?
Yeah, let me just give you kind of a rule of thumb that I kind of think about relative to this. I think oftentimes with coaches, right? Coaches and educators are often using all 34, the CliftonStrengths 34. Right. So they've got the whole breadth of somebody's themes. I think in the education part, I think you want to start with the general descriptions. Right. I think it's often useful to give people the lay of the land, right? Where you want to start with those general descriptions. I think in coaching, as you start to layer on the coaching, you're working with strengths insights. Right. So I think that's often good so that as you're doing both, you can say, hey, I really have an appreciation in the education portion of those general descriptions. In the coaching pieces, we're dealing with just me, that we're dealing with the specific ones. No, and that would be my suggestion around that.
I think that's a good rule of thumb to go with. Dean, we're going to push those other two calibration awareness off to the next theme, to the next call to coach. Any final thoughts as we think about breadth and depth, deep and wide?
I just think it's we're pushing people to the edges of the universe here, right? So we want to push people out so they own all 34. We're pushing people deep so that they know the whole world of each theme, right? The more we could create the world, the more nuance we create, which creates the more sophistication for managers, for leaders, for coaches in the way they relate to people and people's talents, right? So we want to just keep pushing out so we get more and more nuance in the thinking around it.
All right. Sounds good. We'll come back with a series ahead. Lots of information. I know you were a little worried about having enough material.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. It's never the case. I always tell people, no, it'll be fine. And we will look forward to the next series. Again, this is kind of local to today and to the live folks. If you're joining us live, sorry for the scheduling snafu. We moved this up by an hour, but of course it's all recorded for you. If you want to go back and listen to the whole thing, again, you can do that. We'll remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we have available at the Gallup Strength Center, just gallupstrengthcenter.com. So send us your questions or comments. If you got anything on this, you want to get information in, send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. You can catch the recorded audio and video of this program as well as all the past ones on our in our resources tab at the coaches blog. Just go to coaching.gallup.com. If you're interested in becoming a Gallup certified strengths coach, you can see a complete list of all the courses. We have a bunch out there now. If you haven't been out to our courses page in a while, it's probably time to go out and check it out. Courses.gallup.com. A reminder, the summit is very, very close. The 2018 Clifton Strengths Summit, very, very close. Still time to get signed up, although it's closing rapidly. CliftonStrengthsSummit.com. Courses during the summit are 15% off. Those are getting full too. So you might want to, if you haven't moved, now is the time to move. If you're listening to this at the end of June in 2018, if it's not the end of June, let's just say it's 2019, we probably have another summit available for you. So CliftonStrengthsSummit.com will get you there. One more thing, if you're listening on your iPhone, you can subscribe, rate, and review right there in the app if you're doing it that way. If you're on Android, there's plenty of ways to get it available there. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to us. You'll get a notification every time we go live or every time we post a video that's out there. And if you're listening on Spreaker, there is a way to follow us where you get the email as well. Don't forget to join us in our Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/call-to-coach. About 11,000 of us out there with some great conversation. You can join in the conversation and get some of this information and some of this community that we have on Facebook. We'll look forward to the next call to coach. We already know what's coming up. So you want to join us there when Dean is back. And with that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.